Hey everyone, welcome back to the Level Up podcast. I'm your host, Ken Rose, co-founder and CTO at OpsLevel. OpsLevel is an internal developer portal that helps engineering teams quickly ship quality software. Our Level Up podcast explores challenges, best practices, and stories from some of the brightest engineering and DevOps leaders about what it takes to build great products, teams, and companies. Today, we actually have a very special guest. We have Ezra Cohen, who is our very first customer success manager right here at OpsLevel. Ezra built out the customer success practice at OpsLevel and works with all of our customers to help implement their software catalog, set up maturity programs, enable developer self-service, and just overall be successful with our product. So Ezra, thank you so much for joining us.
Ken, thanks for having me. Happy Passover.
Yeah, to you as well. Happy Passover, Easter, Ramadan. I think all the holidays are going on at this time of the year right now. So again, on this episode, we're going to be talking kind of all things software catalog, how to build a catalog, what goes into a catalog. Maybe Ezra, you can start. Can you give us a sense of like when our customers come to OpsLevel, like what are they trying to get out of a software catalog? Like why is cataloging an important problem for them?
Yeah, for catalog comes up. The broad use case for a catalog, I think about this with any product, it's when do I log into it? When do I use it? And the broad case for all cataloging needs is when I have to work on a system or find information about a system I didn't build. So their system is pretty broad there. We can talk about that later. But there's something that exists in my engineering organization. I didn't build it, but I need to find out more about it. And that's why I need a catalog. I need to log in, I need to understand it, find information about it, whatever it might be.
Cool. And who is it like normally that you find comes with that problem? Like, is it an engineer on a developer team or is it a VP? Like, who's the person that's trying to solve that problem?
So it's I kept it pretty vague because it's pretty high level, right? Because it's a bunch of different personas have a bunch of different use cases. So an SRE or a platform team might be trying to drive a change across services, right? Or across systems, across their entire org. So they need to answer questions like, how many services of this type exist? How many teams are compliant with this or the other thing? They might be asking general questions. Or maybe in their DevOps practice, on-call is still something that sits somewhat with a centralized team. And they have a very different use case. They need to find out for this particular service, which I was paged, like where are its runbooks, where are its metrics, where are its dependencies, how do I find its API? Like I don't know anything about this service. It has some nonsensical superhero name, and I'm just like trying to understand what it does and how it works. Like, it's a very hard problem. And then finally, they're like frontline devs who maybe there's a reorg, maybe you're onboarding a new team member, maybe I'm just trying to remember, wait, doesn't that service already exist rather than us starting from scratch? Like, I wonder if I can go find it, for whom this is just sort of a day in, day out problem of finding information. So a bunch of different use cases for a bunch of different people within the engineering organization.
Yeah, I've seen a similar thing. Like something I think a lot about is, we have what we call the OpsLevel adoption curve, right? And it always starts with cataloging. Typically, I've seen also like engineering leaders coming with an idea of we want to have more consistency in how things are built. But the first step to getting there is, okay, what's actually out there? Like, and they might have incomplete spreadsheets, or they might have pockets of this data in automated way. Like, okay, hey, I ran kubectl pods and I got a list of everything running in production, but it's not actually a full and complete catalog. And they need that as a first step just to be able to start driving that change.
Yeah, the story I think about a lot, there's like, maybe it's a parable at this point of the man who drops his car keys on the way home from the bar. And he's like looking for his car keys and he's looking under the streetlight. And the other guy's like, why are you looking here? Like the keys could be anywhere and you walk home. He's like, yeah, but the light is here. And I think there's like a similar phenomenon that happens where people often say, well, we need to drive this change. What's our current status? And so they pull down everything they can quickly like pull together. But what they can pull together is the stuff that's easier for them to access. And so then they try to drive that standard across the stuff that's the least in need of it, and a bunch of the stuff is in the darkness. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. We can talk about that later on. But that sort of standardization challenge is one that's very common, and one that I think the first question to your point is, okay, well, what is the total surface area of things against which I have to drive this change? And that's a very hard problem for many organizations to solve.
Right. So actually, in terms of what makes that problem hard, right? Like I always think of it as okay, you can't do it manually, right? And trust me, I've seen since OpsLevel started every version of the spreadsheet of like trying to catalog infrastructure manually or catalog services manually. And it's always somewhat of a fool's errand because like the data is almost insta stale, folks, I forgot which customer it was. They talked about like, we have a graveyard of like stale spreadsheets of attempts to track this. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about what are some ways that folks kind of get their data into that catalog and help build it up?
Yeah, so we see, there's actually an insight I came to relatively recently that I'll tell a quick story. So my boss tasked me at some point to ask, why are some customer onboardings so much longer than other customer onboardings? Customers bias for nearly the same purpose. Some customers are bigger than others, right? That's going to be part of it. But there's this huge discrepancy in how long it takes for some customers to build their catalog and versus others. And it was a mystery that we were trying to understand. And what we realized at some point, I realized, and since validated, is there is this gap between customers for whom this is a fundamentally technological problem, where they have all the data. It lives in various different places, and their challenge is to get it all together in one place. And then there's another group of customers for whom they live in chaos, and they live in darkness, or companies, I should say, for whom this is a problem that to solve, they need to not only have technology, that's going to be one part of it, they need to drive a change management process. The only way they're going to build this catalog is through work, right? By the sweat of your brow, you should bring forth catalog. Like they're going to have to do some real work here. I don't know if that's too biblical, but essentially just saying like we need each team to register each service because we just don't have a source of truth. And so we get to these like two very different approaches to get to the same place, which is the complete catalog. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so let me kind of dive into that. So what you're saying is, some organizations might have already invested in automation in parts of their business. So like they might have, look, we run every service in Kubernetes. So or we have all of our code in GitHub. So if you go to like this one place or this one or two or three places, you can be reasonably assured you have a comprehensive view of everything that's running in production. But it sounds like other organizations don't have that. They have a lot of just ad hocness or stuff where they haven't invested in automation in different parts. So it like the work you're describing is like figuring out that first step of like, okay, we first have to actually like kind of manually catalog a bunch of this.
Yeah. And I think if you're listening to this in your organization and you're trying to figure out which category you are in, one good question to ask yourself is, how consistent is our naming scheme? Like how consistent are our systems named across all of our different tools, right? Across our metrics dashboard, across Kubernetes, across our repos, across our services. Like if everything has about the same name or close enough that you can funge it together, like make it work, you're probably in a position where this is going to catalog creation is an automation problem, right? Where you can build a spreadsheet today. That's like kind of annoying. Like APIs really help. Like well-documented API really help. Like things that'll help you. Whereas if you hear that description of like, yeah, every service has the same name across every system, right? Every one of our assets is consistent. Everyone follows all the rules. We've done a good job making sure our Git is clean in terms of all the repos. We have a good handle on production services. If you hear that and laugh, which many customers do, like that is so far away from their truth today. Then there's a very different approach that's going to be required. One, there's a lot more there's a lot of value, I think, to be gained from doing this work. There's work that's going to have to happen to bring it together.
Right. And so when in the case of those organizations, like what is some of that work that gets done? Like how should those types of customers like think about building up their catalog?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to understand that this is going to require some toil. This is going to require you're going to have to do some work that engineers are not going to like. And it's going to involve saying, hi, I know you want to ship these features. But we got to pay down some, I don't know, this is a real thing, but organizational technical debt, basically. We have to pay down some amount of, we've been moving quickly. We've created a lot of mess. We have to do some cleanup. And the nice thing about this cleanup is hopefully they don't have to do it once. We'll talk about that later. But so where you should start. So my experience here, I have basically two. I've seen what customers do in spreadsheets, and I've worked in OpsLevel. So that's my perspective on this. But the way that this work generally starts is putting time on sprints, like dedicating time in a roadmap and saying, we're going to spend some time doing some cataloging. And what that's going to look like is we're going to define what it is that is going to make our catalog done. Here's all the data we need. Here are all the systems we need. We need data about the following systems. Here's the data we're going to need. Here's where you're going to find it. We're going to build a big process doc. We're going to go team to team. The team that cares about this the most, typically a platform SRE team, is going to go team to team, org to org. We're going to share the good word about cataloging, and we're going to have each team do this work. And we're going to hopefully build tooling to help, right? Maybe we can pull down the new stuff, right? We can do automatically, but the old stuff we need you to tell us about. And you're going to drive to completeness, and it's not easy, right? It's not like this is not a week-long like hack day activity. This is real work, but it pays off in meaningful ways in the short and the long term.
Right.
But it's hard.
Some of those meaningful ways might be like, hey, now we've identified things that aren't built with automation, and we should actually start to invest in those so that we can get to this world where like we can be more like those organizations that, you know, have everything automated and can just kind of automatically populate their catalog. Right.
Or think about like if you want to do a tool migration. Once you have a catalog that's built and maintained and up to date and automated, when you have a good catalog built out, a tool migration becomes so much easier. Like you can then automate that, right? Which in the way you couldn't today. You can automate if you want to do a big migration, if you want to do not as tool migration, if you want to drive a big initiative, it's so much easier when you have, because now you can automate all sorts of other systems and practices you couldn't before.
Right.
But the cost is real.
Right. So let me ask you kind of a potentially spicy question here, right? Like when I think about ways of integrating data in OpsLevel, you know, like for the former type of customer you described, where it's like you've already invested a bunch in automation and OpsLevel hooks up to those sources. We hook up to Kubernetes, we hook up to GitHub, or all, whatever your Git provider is, actually we support them all. You know, we can kind of automatically support integrations. We can automatically ingest, you know, your catalog and help build that quickly. For the other folks, there's YAML, right? Like it's kind of like we can tell people to drop YAML files and repos and we can synchronize from there. But to your point, like that's effort. Like you have to get each developer team to write the YAML. What are your thoughts on YAML? Like I have my opinions where I think it's a little, it doesn't feel like the right artifact to get developers to write, but like, what do you think about that?
So again, I can tell you from my own experience working with customers who do this, I think overall, I mean, I'll say it this way. One, YAML is toil or YAML is work. There's like no two ways around it. You can put data in a spreadsheet. You can put data in a UI like OpsLevels. You can put data into a YAML file. It is the same. I mean, in one, you don't have to click. So maybe that's different, but fundamentally it's the same. It's toil. I think though it's customers like or people like YAML for two reasons, and I think they're often I found companies are too fast to move to YAML. They like it one because it looks like code. YAML file it's not a spreadsheet. It looks like you're configuring something in a file, right? And it lives in Git, like it's code. And maybe that's a good argument. Maybe the fact that devs look at this and they like it and they say, yeah, I'm doing coding work. This is fine, but it's not good scalable work. It's not automation. It's not building value for your customers. Like it's
right. You get to use like your Git provider for the workflow of editing it, which is maybe better than clicking on a UI. But I agree with you. It's like the toil part is, okay, I as a human, I'm now going to expend brain cycles to think about what's the service called, where does the YAML file live, you know, did it get integrated properly? And
there is, though, that said, there is value, I think, for many companies I've worked with in having it behind a Git workflow where they have change management. That is an appealing aspect to YAML. I think there are other ways to do that. You can use an API, you can use Terraform, you can configure as code. Like there are other mechanisms to reap those same benefits without. And I do think though, customers I work with, I often walk them off a ledge where they're like, perfect, let's just like do YAML right now. I was like, okay, we can. And often that's where you want to end up, is you do want this in your Git repo. So you do want to land on YAML. But for that initial catalog population, it is a last resort as far as I'm concerned. Like it is the last thing we should do is say, okay, everything else has failed. Now we have to use YAML.
Right. And I guess the reason is, again, because all those other sources are they're more automated, right? Like
Exactly. And they lock you out of automation once you've committed to YAML files, right? The goal, when you think about a catalog and the value it provides, there's two questions. There's how does this help us move faster, right? What's the value it gives our organization? But what's the cost? And I mean, Ken, you and I both know, like we sell a SaaS product, like we charge per year. That's one part of the cost. But the other part is the number of hours that is required to like build it, to actually like scope it out. And we want to keep that cost down as much as we can. And when customers move to YAML, the value we're going to provide overall doesn't actually change, but the cost does go up.
Yep.
In a meaningful way. And that's the thing that we always want to try to help customers avoid whenever possible.
Yeah. There's actually two other shortcomings I think about with YAML. One of them is like, what is authoritative, right? So in the kind of automated mode that you describe, where it's like, look, we've already invested again in Kubernetes and Git, right? OpsLevel itself becomes the authoritative place for your catalog info. Like it synchronizes with all these other places, pulls that, but then you can actually look at OpsLevel and say like, hey, I can now look at this as the authoritative place for catalog info. But when you use YAML, you're actually saying my Git repo is the authoritative place for catalog info. And it's a sort of distributed database because the YAML file lives per repo, or if you have a mono repo and a bunch of different subdirectories. But like we basically said, like, I think of a catalog as it's a database, like it's all this info, and we're saying, hey, we're going to partition that info and drop it in a bunch of different Git repos inside of your Git organization and whatever Git tool you use, and try to synchronize that. But like that is probably not an efficient. Actually, I can tell you that is not an efficient way of managing a database, right? One of the challenges I've also seen come up is, if you ever have a campaign where it's like, we want to make sure this tag is enabled on every service.
Yeah. So
much harder when you have to do it across all repos in your org. Because if you are on that team that is trying to drive that change, you might not even have permission to all the different repos, right?
Even if you can submit a PR MR against that repo, which is already like a pretty big if, that you as a platform team have the ability to even like have the automation built out, have the naming schemas worked out, like
have the authorization, right? Like you might be an organization that, right, hey, you're not on that team, you don't even get to contribute to that repo.
And then you're waiting on a developer on that team who might not have any context to just like read the notes and then approve it, and it like they have no urgency, right? Like it's a pain. Like it's really hard. And we do have customers who do manage it successfully, where they automate workflows through YAML. But it's rare and it's very hard. Like this is not like a casual decision they opted into. This is a business process and a culture they built over years to like make this a thing. It's very hard.
A parallel I think about is, like vulnerability management tools that automatically create a PR for you. It's like, great, like the PR is automatically created, but still, I as a service owner, I should look at that. Like it's nice to test, but I should actually verify that this is doing, there's a review that has to go in and getting context. There is a little bit of extra work that the team that is the service owner has to do.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it almost shuts you off from automation later on. It shuts you off from, I think people want to work in a place where stuff is sort of in the same way they interact with products, right? Just like it happens, it's magical. It just like does it for me for free. And I think platform teams often are striving for that. Dev tooling teams strive to have a place where, and cataloging work, I love talking about and thinking about catalogs. Most people don't. They know when they interact with a bad catalog, right? When you interact with a bad catalog, you know it. But they don't, no, people do not like the work of building and maintaining catalogs. It's not like, for their own individual entries in the catalog. It's not work that they like to have to do, especially in a dev organization where people are trying to move really fast. Especially bad.
Hey, Ezra, I want to pick up on something you said. You mentioned, like when you're working with a bad catalog, you know it. Let me actually ask the counter question. What makes for a good catalog? Like, what should folks look for when they think about, this is the holy grail of what my catalog should look like?
Yeah, I can talk about this for a long time, but I'll try to be somewhat brief. So at OpsLevel, we talk about like 4 attributes of a great catalog. And I'm going to use a not service or not systems, or I'm going to talk about restaurant menus, I think is like the one I like to explain this. So the first thing is it's complete. So it has all the stuff. And we talk about completeness and turn into other components. This tree is going to get too big, but it's complete in terms of both. It has the names of all the entries and has all the metadata. So think of a restaurant menu. You arrive at a restaurant It's complete, meaning imagine a restaurant menu that had all the dishes at the restaurant serves, and then no other information. It's not sorted. There's no price. There's nothing.
Just like the chicken coq au vin, but that's it. You don't know if there's shellfish in it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, here is our house pasta. Like, there's just no information. Okay, that's a complete catalog in the sense that it has the names of all the things. To make a software parallel, I pulled down the names of all my services from Kubernetes. Great, I'm done. I have a catalog. Like, no, you don't. You have the names of all your systems plus their Kubernetes clusters. That's what you have. And that's like fine if that's what you want, right? But that's not good enough. The last part is metadata, right? So if you think like details about each of those foods is a metadata complete catalog. So I know if this is an appetizer or an entree, right? I know some of its ingredients. I know its price, right? I know all sorts of data about it. And when you think about what makes for a complete catalog, like exploring its use cases. Maybe that's like a different conversation for another time. Okay. I don't know if those chimes came through. Okay, regardless. Okay, so that's one, complete. Two, it's up to date. Which is to say, sorry, did I cut you off?
No, I was just saying, I was agreeing with you for sure that having a fresh catalog, having a catalog with up-to-date information, is table stakes.
Yeah, and again, this is like the bare bones one, and is a tricky problem in itself. Second, it's up to date. This is probably part of completeness, but its own thing. This happens at restaurants all the time. You go to the restaurant, you sit down, they give you a menu, like, well, actually, we're out of the following 3 items, but we have the following 3 seasonal items on our board. So this is a restaurant dealing with this problem where it's hard to keep it up to date. It's hard to keep the printed menu up to date. The nice thing working in software, this is much easier for people to do, right? Like when you go on Amazon.com, I expect Amazon's catalog of its goods to be up to date. I like to have those things be true. This is another tricky one. Another reason YAML falls down per other conversation. I'm just going to keep riffing. Okay, 3, it's convenient. It's easy to find it. So this is one where restaurants generally do a very good job, right? I walk into the restaurant, I have a QR code I can scan, I have a printed menu I can look at, I can look online, I can look on Uber Eats, I can look on their website, I can look on the board. Like there's all sorts of places. It's very easy for me to find this information. You can imagine a restaurant that had a really good, complete up-to-date menu, they just hid it away. Like pretty useless.
Right. Or if you don't have it online, hey, I heard about this Italian place. I don't want to have to physically go there to get a physical menu to look at. I want to scope it online or wherever surface is convenient for me.
I'm a millennial. I will not call them on the phone. Right? I will not call and ask if they have vegetarian options. I just won't go. Right? As
an aside, technically, I'm old, but I think I might be a millennial as well. I think I've fallen just in the cutoff there.
But convenience is important here. That it's people don't have to remember. In a restaurant, every restaurant has a menu. So here's a bad example. I don't have to remember this exists. It's in my face in some way. It's built into processes, built into systems. The last thing is searchability. I can start with one piece of metadata and then work my way towards the other pieces of data about this. So if you remember back to that early restaurant example, imagine a restaurant, for example, where dishes are sorted alphabetically. So you could still search through the dishes in the restaurant, but it's kind of useless because that's not how I think about, that's not the metadata I have. I know I want an appetizer. Okay, I know I want an entree. I know I want something vegetarian. That is so searchability is pretty critical here I don't have all the data already. So I need to be able to get to it from other parts. So anyway,
it sounds like for services, right? And all the things in your catalog, it's able to easily sort, search, filter, scope down, find the bits that are relevant for you versus just whatever default ordering somebody else happened to, induce upon you.
This is one where, weirdly, in some ways, spreadsheets seem like they're going to be really good at this because, Command F exists on a spreadsheet. You can
Command F, and I'm totally blanking on the feature that all of the spreadsheets have.
You can sort and filter, right?
Yeah.
On every column, right? You can sort by. In theory, it sounds really good. The problem is it requires you to have some kind of baseline knowledge of. I want to see, okay, what about services owned by this team? I want to be able to see services that have this attribute. I want to be able to look at what broader system they belong to. I'm not even sure what the name of the field is that I want, but I know a service, like someone built this like 2 years ago, and I'm pretty sure it exists, and I'm pretty sure I know where it lives. Let me just like see the dependencies, right? Like those sort of questions are hard because spreadsheets don't have visualization. Spreadsheets don't have logic. They don't have their readability falls down. And that's the thing that in some ways, like a good service catalog, it should be easy to search, easy to go from one place to another. I talk for a long time about like what makes for a great catalog. Something I think about a lot. Something I work with our customers on a lot, because people make a mistake of thinking, "Oh, I'll just pull down the names of all my things and I'm done."
Yep. Now, let's also talk about another dimension of the catalog, right? Which is like what makes the catalog useful for different personas. We talked earlier about like, there's kind of like, there's personas around just being a product engineer where you're shipping features and trying to get more context on a service. There's being a platform engineer where you kind of want context on all services to like drive campaigns or introduce new tools or new processes. And there's also the persona of like, I'm going to call it engineering leadership, right? Managers, directors, VPs of engineering. How do you provide different levels of visibility? Like what are ways that your catalog should cater to those different personas?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, one that I'm definitely still learning as I learn about new use cases and new personas and new things in OpsLevel. I think the first thing is when you think about what metadata you have, you're going to think about those different use cases are going to be very different, right? So engineering leadership, if you're trying to drive service maturity because you're on a platform and an infrastructure team, you might need like service tier in a way that a service owner might not care as much about the tier of their services. Managers like want to find this information. And if you are engineering, if you're a leader in engineering, you might need higher level understandings of, I actually don't really care about any particular service. I care about the systems those services speak to. I care about the products underneath my remit that these systems are turned into, right? And so being able to report and view things at that level is much more significant. And that means that the catalog needs to support that metadata.
That's just it. I have a very similar take as well. It's about like different levels of detail. And generally there's this parallel that's sort of like the higher up you are in the org, the higher level view you need. To your point, like I think actually a VP, I'm going to use a fictitious VP here. They don't care about any one service unless it's really bad and it's like the thing holding them down, right? Like everything else is gold and it's like you have this one like beginner service. It's like, what's going on here, guys?
Yeah, the same way that they probably don't care about at some highest level, you don't really care about any one particular developer until they're doing something really exceptionally good or exceptionally bad. Exactly.
But I saw this as almost the parallel that we had. Like we shipped, teams and groups. We shipped groups late last year, and now with systems and domains and OpsLevel, it's kind of similar kind of idea or analog, but on the service side, like being able to give folks at different levels of the organization differing levels of visibility, so that to your point, Ezra, it's like it's not just about like here's my services. I can actually see like here's how this particular business unit is doing in terms of its overall maturity goals, in terms of its SLIs, in terms of its productivity. Here's how this group of teams happens to be doing in terms of DORA metrics. Like you want to be able to measure things at a much more macro or gross level than if you're kind of an engineer in the weeds and you only care about things that are like in your local neighborhood. Like, oh, I care about like the service and within this small set of systems that I work on, higher up the org. It's like, no, I care about this much broader swath of production infrastructure.
Yeah, and the challenge and the great thing about this is building a catalog that can support all of it. And all it requires is that, and this is again another reason why automation is so critical, is the further up you go in terms of adding that data per system and per object, the more automation is beneficial, because people don't always know exactly. Like I build this service, I know I'm part of this product because that's like the name of my team, but like thinking about tiers and domains and that sort of high level org chart, I work in my service every day. That's what the work I'm doing and my team services. And that's what I really spend a lot of time focusing on. Automation really helps you drive understanding this service belongs to this, belongs to that. And then we can build up and roll up those reports and have those happen automatically without too much toil.
Yep. Now, a similar kind of thing, we talked about completeness of the catalog earlier, right? And we talk a lot about services at OpsLevel, but there's more than just services, right, that have to go into your software catalog. In addition to like being able to get different levels of visibility, it's like, hey, here's my services and here's the systems that they roll up into and here's the domains they roll up into. There's also understanding like the entire infrastructure aspect. I was wondering, can you give our listeners just a sense of like the things our customers have talked to us around like tracking infrastructure?
Yeah, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. I maintain a running list of back in the good old days, or battle days, back in the old days when OpsLevel was billed as a service catalog, right? When I started OpsLevel 3+ years ago, that's what I talked about with you and with John. Is like, we're our CEO, right? We are a service catalog. And then almost from the first day I started OpsLevel, I learned that customers were putting stuff in their service catalogs that were not services. And this is true across our customer base. This is true, I mean, not everyone, almost everyone does it. And infrastructure was one of those big things where infrastructure elements require ownership. In a world of DevOps, people are expected to understand how to deploy their own systems onto their infrastructure and track it and understand it and work through it. And that means that teams also own or care about and worry about individual infrastructure components. And ownership means that we need to put it in the catalog. Right? This is a thing that we need to track its ownership. We need to track its metadata. We need to understand, we want to run maturity initiatives against it. And that means we have to track it. And so I'm very excited for OpsLevel support. This is a first class feature. And it's something that our customers over and over and over again express this need for of our ownership requirements extend well beyond a discrete service that lives in a repo that's deployed in a place, right? Like it goes way beyond that to all sorts of other assets and things within their engineering organization.
100%. Again, I take it back to like the OpsLevel adoption curve, right? It's like catalog your stuff, invest in automation to automate the catalog, and then you can start to drive maturity. And maturity for infrastructure is just as important as maturity for services. There's dimensions around security, like, hey, we found a bunch of S3 buckets that are open for public rights. Like, why is that happening? Costs, right? Like, hey, we found a team that's running, I don't know, pick on AWS, like M5 8XL for a tier 4 service. Like, what's that about, right? And you find context, oh, we had some production incident a year ago, we scaled the database, we forgot to spin it down. So there's just a lot of compliance, security, consistency initiatives that folks are trying to drive. And the final one is just also like, I think there's something about discoverability and kind of onboarding. It's like, hey, if I'm new to a company, great, I know what the services are. Where do I get a list of like the pods to look for? If I want to start debugging something, it's just more metadata to capture that builds that full and complete catalog.
And customers without this in the past, right, when they're back in spreadsheet days, what they do is they just look at their name of the thing and they want to say, they'll just go into AWS and build a spreadsheet. Or they'll like go into Slack or they'll go on Slack and say, hey, can anyone tell me the answer to this question? And that sometimes works. It's slow. It's not reliable. It's not scalable. If your engineering organization is 25 developers, it's probably fine. But at some point, it really, really breaks. And that's where again, without a catalog, you can do it in the same way that you can like ask your waiter, what are the specials today? And they'll tell you. But that doesn't scale well. That doesn't scale into hundreds of thousands of specials. That doesn't scale well, right?
Right. And your waiter is there to answer your questions. Right. Developers are not there to answer your questions. They're there to do other stuff, right?
And
like they don't want to be interrupted.
Team there to answer questions about how, like, they don't want to walk you through Kubernetes, how Kubernetes works the 10,000th time, the 10,000th person, right? Like, that's not their job, or at least shouldn't be their job, right? So it's a big challenge, and it's something that I think a lot of companies don't even understand there is a solution for, and it's consolidating that data into a single place. Not to make this too off-level salesy, but that's how I think about it, at least.
Well, listen, Ezra, as we wrap up here, things we chatted about today were kind of really all things software catalog, right? We chatted about what should go into a catalog, including infrastructure. We talked about how to easily get your catalog set up and some of the perils of YAML. We talked about the importance of having different levels of detail for different personas. So for our listeners, if you want any more info about anything we talked about here today around software catalog, you can check out our release announcement on the OpsLevel software catalog. We'll put a link in the show description below, or just Google OpsLevel software catalog. As well, if you want to hear more from Ezra, feel free to reach out to him. He's on LinkedIn, or you can email him. He's Ezra at OpsLevel.com. Alternatively, become an OpsLevel customer, and then you can actually get on a call with Ezra monthly and get to hear his thoughts and opinions on how to best build up your catalog, roll out a maturity program, and make OpsLevel successful, for your company. As always, I want to thank all of our listeners for making it to the end of the episode. A huge thank you to everyone. And if you have any topics or guests you'd like to see on the show, feel free to send us an email at levelup@opslevel.com. We'll see everybody next time, and happy building.